JP Sears has been agitating dissenters for a little while now with his comedy videos, and I can't help but be fascinated by what kind of mind thinks that this...
Happy New Year! It's 1984. Free speech is the worst, right? Affection spreads infection.
...is crusading for freedom. Let's talk about this. Hello everyone, I'm Andy Fellows and I make videos on cult skepticism and making sense of life after New Age spirituality. If you're interested in a more grounded and skeptical approach to New Age spirituality, then why not subscribe to the channel and hit the bell? Rather than sitting here and talking about JP's comedy, which really seems to me to be a way for him to sort people into agreeers and dissenters, you know? That's my take on it anyway. But instead of talking about that, let's talk about JP Sears' podcast, where he shares what he really thinks a little bit more openly. And heads up, we're about to go headlong into QAnon light and alt-right conspiracy theory land, so buckle up. Before we jump into this, I do just want to say quickly that it's very unlikely that this video is going to get monetized. So if you enjoy this video, if you get something from it, A, please consider sharing it on your social medias to help sort of get it out to more people. And B, if you want to help support this channel because you're enjoying the videos I'm making, then please consider becoming a patron. There's a link to my Patreon in the description below, and every single month I do live streams that are exclusive to patrons. And when this video is out, just as you're watching this video right now, I've actually also released like an audio companion to this video over on the Patreon, where I'm going into some of the stuff that I'm talking about in this video in a little bit more depth, and talking about some of the things that I either didn't have time to talk about in this video or can't really talk about in this video on YouTube. So if that sounds interesting to you, then please consider checking out my Patreon. If you join at even the lowest tier, that makes a big difference and you get access to both of the things that I just mentioned there. Anyway, let's get on with the video. In a recent episode of his podcast entitled The Freedom Manifesto, JP Sears says this.
So it seems like the past 10 months, my mission has changed from making people laugh while kind of becoming more self-aware of the egotistical nature to crusading for freedom.
Yep. And this includes all of the normal, you know, classic freedoms, the freedom of speech, obviously, freedom to not be vaccinated, freedom to grift, and freedom to ignore COVID lockdown measures.
Freedom of speech, yes. Freedom to have medicines put in our body or not based on our choice, yes. Freedom to run our business, yes. The freedom to leave our house, the freedom to gather with friends, yes.
He also talks about what it means to be an awakened warrior.
An awakened person thinks for themselves. A warrior, there's someone who upholds freedom and bravery, not someone who upholds fear, not someone who bends to intimidation. There's someone who follows their heart.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure a warrior is someone who fights. Someone who battles it out in a war of some kind. But JP's redefining that for us today. He talks about how being an awakened warrior means you stand for bravery and freedom and courage.
An awakened warrior, someone who thinks for themselves and someone who follows their heart and has the bravery, freedom, and courage in order to do that.
I'm pretty sure that bravery and courage are pretty much the same thing. I'm pretty sure that in order to be courageous, you have to have bravery. Why would you put those two things on a list next to each other?
So I'll say once again, in my lifetime, there has never been a need for more awakened warriors on the planet. And each of our awakened warrior, I feel like I'm like giving out like a manifesto.
The long-awaited return of the YouTube spiritual teacher laugh is upon us, and I couldn't be happier, because this time it's come with extra David Brent vibes. Fantastic. All of this is coming off the back of some of his YouTube videos recently being censored on account of them containing mostly conspiracy theory brain slime. But it seems that JP is intent on riding his persecution complex into the sunset, right into bullshit land, integrating all of his experiences into his bold and powerful, courageous and brave, freedom-fighting hero's journey, riding bareback on a unicorn born of New Age pacifism until it comes to it. That said, the general theme of his content at the moment does seem to be conspiracy theories and, you know, alt-right sentiments played into some kind of a joke. And on his podcast, you kind of see under the hood, if you like, under the bonnet of that. But as well as that, in his podcast, what he's saying, for me, kind of strikes at the heart of what makes successful cults successful. Now, I'm not saying JP Sears is a cult leader or anything like that, but what I am saying is there's some things that he's saying in his podcast that when I hear them, having read what I've read on cults, having had the experiences I've had, kind of make my ears prick up a little bit. They make me go, I don't like this. I don't like the sound of it. I don't like the look of it. Now, this podcast contains a number of things that really strike me as concerning. They strike me as cult red flags. One of them is conspiratorial thinking without limits, but conspiratorial thinking does not a cult make. But there's other stuff too, like this.
You know, it's a mission, I hope it doesn't come to this, but it's a mission worth dying for. Freedom.
This is a transcendent message of freedom and a conversation about dying for it. That strikes me as really worrying. Like, even though he says, oh, but I hope it doesn't come to that, the way he's talking is it's supposed to be metaphorical, but that's not enough of a swerve for me. That's not enough of a wide berth from that idea for me. And I do talk about this a little bit more in the audio companion to this video I mentioned on the Patreon feed. So if you want to hear me talk a bit more about that, that's where you'll hear it. But then there's also this as well.
They watch the media too much. They're all brainwashed. What I've seen with my own eyes, which seem to be more accurate than the media, see more people saying no to surrendering their freedoms.
It's an us versus them narrative, right? It's this these awakened warriors, these awakened weirdos who are subscribed to his channel, who are subbed to his newsletter, versus the evil media and the evil governments who are trying to force people to give up their freedom. But that's not all. There's more. There's an incredibly bold statement about there never having been a greater assault on our freedom. And let's be fair, I can think of a few.
I don't think our freedoms have ever been more under assault from evil.
One that I think comes to everybody's mind, which he does mention because every conversation on the internet eventually arrives us there. Again, something else I'm not going to be touching on too much in this video, but you know where to find it. And of course, this wouldn't be content from a YouTube spiritual influencer if it didn't include at least one redefinition of a word that we are all fully familiar with.
Here's my definition of evil. Anyone or anything that tries to control another person that is not in that person's best interest.
What I love about this redefinition of the word evil is that the definition that he's given is remarkably close to the definition that I and others who also use the term undue influence use to describe undue influence. So if you replace the word control with influence there, I think it begs the question, what about people who influence others to their detriment without realizing A, they're influencing them, or B, they're doing it to their detriment? But of course, this kind of a reductionist approach is par for the course when we're talking about black and white thinking. At some point in this podcast, though, he also makes a comment on mind control, which is kind of funny because it almost sounds like he thinks that mind control is just telling someone what you want them to think and telling them that you want them to think that, when it's not that. It's much more complex than that, and it's much more subtle than that.
So I want you to think, I want you to know this. Here, I'm trying to mind control you right now, so just get mind controlled.
I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt on that one, though, because I don't think that anyone's that stupid. I don't think that anyone really thinks that that's how mind control works. I want you to think this. I want you to think that I'm great. Well, now everybody's mind controlled and everyone thinks I'm great. The main meat of what JP's talking about in this podcast episode really is the brain rot that is conspiracy theory thinking. When that's out in the open, he's talking about how big tech are evil and about how they've censored Trump.
Big tech, they banned President Trump.
And he's talking about how Parler getting taken down is also an assault on freedom of speech.
Big tech dismembers the freedom of speech platform, censorship-free platform, Parler.
And he's talking about how the media are 0% trustworthy. And, don't get me wrong, I'm not here saying they're 100% trustworthy. I would say on the best of days, they're probably 60-70% trustworthy. And you've got to be careful where you're going for that information, because a lot of people just make shit up and embellish stuff. I wouldn't say they're like 0% trustworthy. In the way that JP's talking here, it's that they are.
And this is all right hand in hand with them trying to absolutely silence President Trump. Why? I don't know.
My favorite part when he's talking about Trump is when he seems to be thinking of one video of Trump while speaking about another video of Trump.
I know the reasons. Is, he's trying to incite violence. It's like, no, motherfucker, I saw his video. He was promoting peace. Like, I'm going to interpret this with my own eyes. No, but I am not going to see this through the lens that the media tells me. It's like, nope, I hear media. What you're telling me happened. But I'm seeing with my own eyes the video he released. He's calling for peace. Like, to me, that's not inciting violence. So media, fuck off. I will think for myself.
I think whenever we're talking about conspiracy theories and stuff, I think it is always worth recognizing the grain of truth that's present within them. And there often is a grain of truth present within pretty much every conspiracy theory to a lesser or greater extent, and usually a lesser extent, right? So yeah, I think it is troubling that tech companies do have such influence over so many aspects of our lives, be it because we use social media to connect, like during a pandemic and stuff where we can't actually be face-to-face. Social media is a lifeline for some people, right? And then of course a lot of people get their news through social media, and everybody's getting different versions of the news. And then because there's very little government oversight with these kinds of things, it's left to the people who are running these platforms to sort of morally police the platforms, like who gets to say what, when, and how, you know? And moreover, I'm sort of troubled by how these platforms are built to be addictive in a way, and they are used to generate responses from us, to generate reactions from us, and to collect data on us so that they can make money. And that we should never forget, I think, with these kinds of companies, even if they seem to be interested in certain political points of view or whatever, their main interest, their top interest is earning money. But that is very different to jumping to big tech are all in cahoots and they are deliberately trying to silence the truth and censor free speech. It's not that you don't have these freedoms, it's that you've abused these freedoms on private platforms. And those platforms have pushed back. Those platforms have decided they don't want to tolerate it. Blatant nonsense, which is causing more civil unrest, which is causing a lot of people to do a lot of really silly and or dangerous things. And it's splitting families up and more. I mean, let's be fair. But as far as JP Sears' tirade against reality goes, sorry, not tirade against reality, what was it? Crusade for freedom. As far as his crusade for freedom goes, I don't think this is really about freedom of speech. I think this is about the irresponsible use of freedom of speech on private platforms and effectively asking for consequences and then bitching when they arrive. This is about saying things that have disastrous consequences, like Capitol Hill, like QAnon breaking up families, like actual violence, actual deaths. And then other people, in the best way they can, in the best way they know how, trying to mitigate that damage. It's not that you can't or shouldn't have freedom of speech, it's that a responsible member of society uses their freedom of speech responsibly. And for better or for worse, if in a peaceful, democratic, capitalist society that has at least some checks and balances in place for managing power and the abuse of it, if you start spreading baseless misinformation, if you start inciting or organizing violence, that society is gonna push back. I mean, what do you expect? It's not nice, it doesn't feel good, but at the end of the day, check yourself before you wreck yourself, my friend. Also, it has to be said, and this is a problem that I have with sort of both sides, sort of both of the extremes on the political spectrum. If you share your ideas in a way that's generally more socially acceptable, people are gonna want to listen to you more. But if you just literally just go onto Twitter or wherever and just like blah, 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 then people are going to get fed up. They're not going to want to listen. If you're being disrespectful, if you're acting like a raving lunatic, then people aren't going to want to listen, are they? If these people weren't wantonly spreading totally baseless misinformation, this wouldn't be happening. If they, at least fact checked a little bit rather than just believing random shit on random websites from experts who clearly aren't very well versed in what they're talking about, then you wouldn't be in this mess. But none of this really matters. These people aren't going to listen, because who cares when you can just flat out deny reality? Who cares when you can just full on justify your nonsense with bullshit that you believe now? And the reason I'm comfortable calling this bullshit and not when I'm talking about the New Age stuff is because a lot of this stuff is verifiably false. Like, it's verifiably false. And there's no two ways about that. Anyway, the whole tone of this podcast episode was that of someone who clearly wanted to state their opinions, who clearly was annoyed about some stuff and needed to say it, and maybe was a little bit butthurt about their videos being censored, just a little bit. And throughout it, he's like dodging and weaving between stating his opinion and then saying something to the effect of, is that true? I don't know. In that kind of painfully predictable sort of conspiratorial mode where they're like, I'm just asking questions, man. There's a few moments in there where he seems like he wants to express himself more, but he's kind of holding back a little bit, and he's leaning into that, well, I don't know things, so that he's not taking a position, and that's making it more likely that he's going to get kicked off the platform. That's my interpretation of that anyway. But one of the really interesting things is that he says, even if I'm deplatformed, that's not my freedom taken away. Even if I'm deplatformed, I still have my freedoms, right? And then within like 5 minutes either side, I'm not sure what order he said it in, but he says like, I'm doing what I can to not get deplatformed. And so it's a really interesting thing where he clearly values the platform. He clearly wants to have that audience, and of course he does, you know, it's his livelihood and all that, and I get that. But it's a self-defeating point. It's like the platform's important, but it's really not that important because freedom doesn't go when that's taken away. So on a level, he seems to recognize that Trump getting kicked off of Twitter and Parler getting removed isn't an assault on freedom of speech. And he seems to contradict himself in saying, even if I'm deplatformed, I haven't lost my freedoms. But then the whole point of everything he's said until that moment is that freedom of speech is being, that there has never been a greater assault on our freedom of speech. So it's like, what are you saying then? Like, is this happening or isn't this happening? And he also seems to think that stating his opinion and then following that up with a leading question and then going, I don't know, is almost erasing the fact that he's stated his opinion. It's so bizarre. I mean, listen to it if you want to waste 50 minutes, but it's absolutely bizarre. Anyway, let me know what you think to this in the comments below. But please be kind and ask good questions. I'm Andy Fellows. I'm here pretty much every Thursday. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, and please consider checking out the Patreon if you like the kind of content I'm making and you want to help support the channel. That's about it from me today, so I'll see you in the next one.